to stand and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please read item A.
Agenda item A is the construction of the County House Trail Phase 2 project from the intersection of College Park Drive and Stadium Boulevard to Rollins Road.
Staff, please.
Thank you. This project was selected at the September 3rd, 2013 council meeting as a round 2 project of the Get About funding and was chosen over an alignment that went east of Russell School. The scope consists of constructing a trail from the north terminus of Phase 1 of the County House Trail at the intersection of Stadium Boulevard and College Park Drive, continuing west around the Southwest Swim Club to Oxford Drive. From there, the trail will continue north along city-owned right-of-way to Rollins Road. The proposed trail will be reinforced 6-inch thick concrete, 10 feet wide, and will be constructed mostly on city right-of-way. There is an existing path used for utility maintenance access that will be utilized where feasible. Approximately 8 permanent easements will be needed, and approximately 85 trees 6-inch and larger are expected to be removed. 2 IP meetings were held June 12th and August 26th of 2014. The cost of this project was originally estimated at $445,000. However, changes in the alignment as a result of the IP meetings increased the project estimate to $775,000. The changes include a longer trail, additional retaining walls, extending the box culvert under Stadium Boulevard, additional tree clearing, and 1 additional crossing of the County House branch. This section of the trail, as mentioned earlier, is one option of other alignments studied in 2007 connecting the Twin Lakes Park to Cosmo Park. The project will be funded with Get About grant funds, and construction is proposed in the summer of 2016. Be happy to answer any questions.
I have 3 questions. And the first question, I'm going to ask the city manager because this keeps popping up on my Facebook page. Why don't we use this money and hire firefighters?
This is a federal grant, and so we may not use it for any other purpose.
Second question is that hypothetically we may approve this project plus options 1 and 3. In the hypothetical situation in which we approve this project and Rollins 1 and 3, and we don't have enough money to complete all 3, how will that be managed?
Once we get through tonight, with all the projects that we're talking about here, I'm going to sit down with Parks Director Mike Griggs, and we're going to go through all the money that he has, that I have, and we bring back to council, should we not have enough money for all these projects, on how we see these need to be funded, or let you all prioritize them and tell us what needs to be funded.
So I'll just underscore the work of the council tonight is really to decide what the alignments will be and how much trail you want. We'll come back with a funding plan that you may or may not like, and you can change at that point. But the funding is not as much of a question tonight as the alignment and which trails do you want to do.
As somebody who's ridden a lot of trails in a lot of cities, I stand at the top of Rollins Street and look down that ravine, and I see a 20 or 30-foot drop-off. I want to be convinced that this is doable without huge, massive switchbacks through 2 or 3 yards.
Well, we do have switchbacks on other trails. Project Greenbrier would be one of them. That's a pretty steep project. We also have one over on Old 63 that we came under a bridge and back up onto Old 63. So it's doable, and it can be done at a good rate. And so again, tonight we're talking about the alignment, and we'll come back to you with easements in a future date to show you that it can be done.
And if we will have an opportunity to be critical of the grades and the location of the switchbacks at that time, should we pass it tonight.
Yes.
And just to, again, underscore that, at that point, you might choose to not do one to fund the others, or, there's, I think, 5 Get About projects that are still live, as I remember. Or
about that.
That's right. So you have the opportunity to reprioritize which ones you wish to fund.
I just have one question, and that was, I've been meeting with folks pro and con. I'm sure the rest of the council has as well. And one of the questions that I promised those folks that I had talked to had to do with what happens on the north side of this. So, I mean, PEDNet historically, and then Get About later on, has always had this this spokes and wheel concept and connectivity and all the rest of it. That's what we've been striving for. What happens? What is envisioned for any connectivity on the north side of this? Should this occur?
There were options on the screen. The study in '07 provided different alignments. Ultimately, the goal was to connect Twin Lakes to Cosmo, and we do have one of our Get About project is a sidewalk on Manor, and we'll be bringing that forward. And so Manor is a connection that is up the hill and does cross over Broadway and continues north. So that new sidewalk is part of the system, if you will.
Any other questions from council?
Yes, I walked the trail with staff, and I wanted to follow up on the mayor's question about the steepness at Rollins. Had you looked at yet taking, I understand the pipe going under Rollins is needing to be, the stormwater pipe needs to be replaced, and that there's going to be maybe a box culvert. Have you looked at the possibility of enlarging that or raising that or deepening that so the trail could go through there? Because the trail's not going to be usable when there's high water anyways. So something like by Providence and the...
Well, we really didn't look
there.
at going through that box. We looked at if it does get extended, it might help us with the grade changes, having that further south and trying to get that elevation change quicker. If that project, if the stormwater funding is available for that project, that would be something we can incorporate together. But we really hadn't looked at going through that box at this point.
So that would be one possible solution that doesn't encroach on the two property owners.
And that's going to take some more study and more in-depth to look at that, but that's a possibility of when that grade moves further south, that may give us a chance to utilize some of that terrain and not make it such a steep incline as it is now. Because as that fill slope comes off the road, it allows for opportunity to maybe utilize that.
Just one additional question. It gets back to that culvert. Obviously, that it is deteriorating, and it's going to need some work. And you're proposing a box culvert, but those two sources of dollars are segregated, right? I mean, those are two separate projects that have nothing to do with.
Correct.
That's correct. That is.
Although this is just anticipated that because it's in the discussion.
It's something we need to look at as we proceed with it. What's most cost effective to do?
That's correct. And that pipe is going to need some attention sometime soon.
Any other questions?
Another question that was raised was whether you looked at a connection that went east and south of Russell School so that you'd cut the hill climb on College Park by half or two-thirds. Was that looked at?
I think that was looked back in the original study. Is that?
Yeah, somebody brought that up at the interested parties meeting, and it wasn't an alignment that we originally looked at in 2007. So it was just an additional one that anything's feasible, but we didn't particularly look at that alignment.
I think at that time we were given direction that we needed to study this particular one at the council meeting. So that's.
You needed to study. What was that? I couldn't.
The one that we are working on today was the direction we were given, that we were not directed to put time to study the one going east around the school.
At the other end of the trail down at College Park and Stadium, will it be a pedestrian-activated crosswalk going across College Park there to get from where the trail comes out from under the box culvert under the stadium across to the west side?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions? I'll open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak?
My name is Darwin Hindman. I live at 1223 Francis Drive. And you heard excellent arguments in connection with this. And I would like to add just a little bit. And that is that we have a wonderful trail system, and one of the goals is to interconnect it to neighborhoods as much as possible. And that was one of the accomplishments of Phase 1 of the County House branch. This would extend those benefits up to a significant number of new neighborhoods. The city owns a street right-of-way that would take up nearly the entire route of this project. This should be used for the highest and best use for the community, and I believe extending this wonderful trail system to these neighborhoods is truly the highest and best use. It will be a great benefit to the community as a whole, and has been pointed out, very likely would be to the neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
I'm going to close the public hearing. Council discussion, I'll start.
Could I ask a question?
Yes. Yes, off staff?
Yes.
Okay, go
Right.
ahead.
There's been a comment on the concerns about the water in the valley with additional pavement, and I know there were concerns and problems with the Moon Valley route, and there's still some standing water there. Can you talk, but I know there were changes after that in other trails. Can you talk a little bit about what you do to examine the hydrology effects and what can be done to mitigate that so that you're leaving that area absorbing the water similar to what it was before the trail?
Well, we have to follow the National Environmental Policy Act, which we refer to as NEPA. The federal government requires it on all these projects. Therefore, you have to do studies. MoDOT signs off on these, as well as federal highways. And so we try to, as we design these projects, to make sure we have to meet all these requirements by these national policies. As far as runoff in those areas, when you start talking about a stream like the Hinkson, you're going to have some wetlands that develop. You're going to have some ponding. That's part of the stream in itself. I don't know about this particular stream. I don't know. It's not like the Hinkson. It's probably a little steeper grade than that. And so we're not going to have probably the ponding that you would see on the Hinkson Creek because of that nature. But, you know, we will have some areas that may need to be filled after we're done. If we have some areas that people are concerned about mosquitoes, we come back and fill those when we reseed it, and we try to make sure that there's no standing water that is impacting the neighbors.
John, I think there was a change in your practices after the Moon Valley Trail and before the Katy connector behind the movie theater at Forum, because I was very impressed with the process that you ran there with a couple of walks with council members, and I think the public were invited to really look at the detailed alignment, to show how you were selecting the route to avoid all of the old growth trees, as well as preserve the dead trees that are bat habitat, and to design the switchbacks to have the least environmental impact.
Yeah, one of the things that we run into, as you saw Dave allude to, some of this was planned back in 2007, which was 8 years ago. And so we lose track of exactly what people remember and those things. And so we started after the Moon Valley Trail staking it so everybody had a chance to walk it publicly. The staff walked with you, showed you what trees we were taking out. And that's what we try to do on all these trail projects now, to make sure everybody's up to speed when they do it, because council does change, and you know, even though we've gone through the process, people have moved in and out.
And that trail, the Forum Katy Connector, is a beautiful trail with trees very close to the trail that clearly has not had a dramatic impact.
And that's one of the things here. We have a right-of-way that we're trying to stay in and not impact our private property. It's just sometimes you can't help it.
Mm-hmm. Questions?
Yeah, I just had a question. Actually, I was here in 2007 when that discussion was occurring. It has changed. There's no doubt about it. And with respect to some of those changes, I wanted to ask, there have been several people that came forward, landowners, property owners, who were in favor of this and who are going to be impacted. And there were several folks that spoke against it because they too were going to be impacted. And I understand, I went on the tour, and the staff explained to me as well what some of the possibilities were, and there were changes because some people's property that was impacted was changed because of the route of the trail and so on and so forth. I guess what I'm asking for is a sense of whether this is a dozen people that are impacted, and do you have a sense of how many of these folks are willing to accommodate or are in favor of this, as opposed to how many folks are really opposing this on the grounds of how this might impact their private property?
There's 8 easements needed. I don't know if
8 easements needed.
Yeah.
And some of them are controversial, and some of them aren't. I take it some people.
Some of them will be permanent easements. Some of them would be temporary easements. As we construct it. I mean, it's hard to say. We don't have the detailed design quite yet, and so as we come forward, that's something that will be coming back to council.
But the bulk
are
of
the
this
easements.
The bulk of this is a utility easement
Yes.
too. And then there are some others in addition to that.
Yes.
I take it. Okay.
So,
Mr. Scala kind of asked one of my questions I just wrote down about the amount of right-of-way that we already have, so I can extrapolate that from the limited number of easements, we already own the vast majority of the right-of-way for this trail,
Yes.
excluding, obviously, those few properties that have to have the temporary or permanent easements. So that answered one of my questions. And then another individual came and spoke about the road itself, because it's going to be paved, correct?
Trail, yes.
And so, as this is following our sewer line, and if there is ever an event that we have to have heavy equipment come back in there, this is nothing different than what's already throughout our community with the paved trails and on the utility easements.
Correct.
Is there a problem or explain to me and the audience what they would expect if they had to bring heavy equipment in there? Would that road or that trail hold that weight of that equipment?
Sure, 6 inches of concrete will hold pretty much.
Okay.
And as long as it's not being used as a road,
Right, just
it'll hold
to
up
come back in and fix
most
something.
anything. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All our residential streets are 6-inch non-reinforced streets in the city.
So this is the
And-
same standard most of our older streets are.
I would expect the sewer department to come in and look and make sure there's nothing that they need to do before we put the trail in. I mean,
Those were the questions that I had.
Anybody else have any questions? So I'm going to start with my discussion. I'm a big fan of the trails. I'm going to approve this resolution. I'm going to vote to approve this resolution. I think that we have to understand where this fits into the big picture of things, because we're nearing the $28 million, the end of that non-motorized transportation grant. And we may, with our plans, we may be over that. I don't know. And so an approval tonight does not mean this trail will be built, frankly. If the money is not there, this will have to get into a priority list, and we'll have to, it'll be the council who decides which trails make the cut and which don't. And I say that mindful of the fact that we have a 1/4 cent park sales tax continuation coming up. I'm not sure whether it's going to be August or November, but those of us that are parks and trails fans, we're going to have to get together like we did 5 years ago and get that continuation passed. And I also say this is, for me, contingent on the design. If I'm Mrs. Sternad and I look at that drop-off, I would be really worried about how much concrete you're going to take out of my backyard over a series of switchbacks. So I think it is absolutely incumbent of us that intrusion be as minimal as possible, and we all weight that design. So again, this is my vote, our vote is a contingent vote. It's contingent on the sequence of possibilities I mentioned.
Well, I'm going to go next. This project's in the 4th Ward, and I want to start by acknowledging people who choose where they want to live based on the environment and their desire for some quiet and some privacy, and understand that is something that we should value as a community, is people's desire to make their choices and establish their homes in a particular setting. But as a city council, we really have to look a bigger picture than individual homeowners. The individual homeowners are part of that picture, but we have to look at the whole. I have to look at the whole of Fourth Ward, and really we each have to look at the whole city. We're not just legislating our own wards. So with that frame, then this connection is part of an entire system of trails, as several speakers have mentioned. And it makes connections that allows more and more people to enjoy the trails, and people really do enjoy the trails. There are hundreds of homes that are north of Rollins, that are even west of this trail and on the other side of Stadium, that will be within a quarter mile of this trailhead and be able to use this trailhead to access a beautiful trail through the woods, which I am certain will be designed beautifully, just as the Forum Katy connector. And if people haven't seen that trail, you should take a walk just behind the Forum movie theater. It's absolutely gorgeous. It goes about a quarter mile down to the MKT trail. It's attractive through the trees. It has not damaged that environment, and it allows workers in that business and employment district and residents in that area to very easily and safely access the trail. This trail will eliminate the need to ride a bike or walk on College Park, which is very steep. The point where College Park meets Rollins is much higher than where this trail comes out. So for a lot of people, they will have to ride all the way up to a much higher point right now to then descend again to get to the point where the trail starts. By building in the creek corridor, we have the least amount of gradient that we can possibly have. And there are plenty of neighbors that we've heard from that live right in that area who really want this trail, including some whose property will be impacted by the current design that we have on the books. There is overwhelming evidence that people who live near trails really love their trails. And sometimes people have concerns before the trail is built, and very often then come to love them after they're built. A lot of the concerns that people have turn out not to be the case. We heard from testimony about how people are moving to Columbia because we are gaining a reputation as a city of trails. It's one of the things that sets us apart from many, many other cities. And that's a great thing. And as we continue to build the system and to give access to the trail system to more and more people, that benefit will only continue to grow. The staff have made a number of changes to the original alignment for this trail in response to neighbors' concerns. Some of the residents in those neighborhoods and also the Southwest Swim Club. And the Southwest Swim Club is perfectly comfortable with the current proposal. And as people have mentioned, they will be a beneficiary in terms of people being able to access, and especially young people, the swim club by the trail, and that will reduce the pressure on their parking area. But I would ask, in supporting and approving this trail, would ask that you look at alignments, look at the possibility of putting the trail under Rollins Road if that culvert is going to be rebuilt. It will greatly reduce the amount of height that has to be gained on the south side and allow the trail to maybe connect to the north side of Rollins, if that was possible, and any other alternatives to minimize the impact on the property owners who would lose property on the current plan. I do want to respond to the concerns about impervious pavement. I really don't think that a thin 10 feet wide strip makes any big picture impact to stormwater runoff. Just as long as there is a gentle sideways slope to that trail, then the rainwater that falls on the trail is going to run straight to the side and soak right in there. As long as we don't build it like a storm drain, then it's really not going to have any major impact at all. There is a lot of water runs down that corridor, and one of the reasons is that we've built so much impervious surface upstream, parking lots and big wide roads. As we build out our trail system and we encourage more non-motorized transportation, we reduce those kind of impacts, which are the impacts that really cause stormwater problems. I also firmly believe that there will be very little, if any, negative impact on animal life in that area. I see birds and mammals and other animals close to trails all the time, as another speaker mentioned, if we open up these natural areas for more people, in particular children, to come in and experience the beauty and wonder and see the wildlife, then that generation will grow up loving those things more and will seek to preserve them. So in the long run, we are really doing a benefit to preserving our natural resources. So I will be voting to ask you to go ahead with detailed design for this trail.
Oh, great, thank you. You know, I've evolved on this over the years. I think, I mean, I started out with many years on the Environment and Energy Commission. Certainly, we've had those fights, Ian, those fights about impervious pavement on some of the trails many years ago. I won't characterize it as losing that fight, but we now have a trail system by which we have 6-inch cement, and we've gained a lot of ground. Excuse the pun. In terms of how we treat the natural environment. That is, I can remember before issues like Moon Valley, when we put in a high water bridge in that particular area and had to clear out a lot of the timber and so on. There were even some questions about owl habitat and some of the dead trees and so on. Now we are protecting some of the dead trees. We're actually putting guidelines in and making sure that some of that habitat is preserved. And generally speaking, I've evolved into becoming a believer that the trail system is a good thing generally. There are issues, however. One of those issues is obviously boiling to the forefront tonight, and that has to do with the city's responsibility in terms of what its easements connote and what private property is all about. In this particular instance, with this County House Trail Phase 2 project, I think that the staff has done a lot of work with respect to taking advantage of the city's easements and minimizing the amount of impact that the city has with respect to some of the private property issues. And a lot of these things have been said. Ian, you mentioned some of them, and some of the other folks have as well. Generally speaking, ultimately property values tend to increase. There is an aesthetic component to this, not the loss of habitat, actually gaining the ability of people to appreciate the habitat that there is, because these are areas that typically people would not get a chance to see. And usually the fears that are recognized with trails about suspicious folks being back there and all the rest of it are mitigated by the fact that the more people you get out there, the better it is for our public safety, actually. That's the best thing that we can do for public safety, is to get our community out there, walking around on the trails and in the neighborhoods. So in this particular, I'll have more to say about this with respect to the other trail issue, and I'm also very interested in this idea that the mayor raised about priorities, the amount of money that we have, because I'm very mindful of what these budgetary considerations are. Even though these are segregated funds and they come from the Get About stuff, there is a limit. I can remember in, I think it was 2007 or 8, we were up against $13 million. We were going to spend $13 million on the rest of these trails, because that's what was left out of the $20 million after we advertised how to get people out of their cars and onto bicycles and so on. I thought that was a bit much to spend on advertising, but nonetheless, that's what we had left, and that's how we decided to start approaching some of these trails projects. So I'll be real interested in terms of what this means for the prioritization of those, the monies and those trails that we have left beyond, and including this County House Trail Phase 2, and with the other one that we're going to consider tonight, the Shepard to Rollins connector as well. I'll bring some of those questions up at the time. But at this point, I'm prepared to support this trail project in terms of the plans and specifications moving forward.
Well, I'll add a few comments here. I was on the City Council when we received the non-motorized transportation grant from the federal government, and we aptly branded that as Get About Columbia, Get About projects. And so in listening to the conversations and comments this evening, I hear a lot of people deviating from the purpose of this trail, which it's being funded by the Get About funds, which is a transportation project. This is not really for recreation. This is to change the mode of which people get from point A to point B. Recreation is a component of that, but the primary focus of these funds and the extension of many of these trails is to get people to use alternative transportation to get from their homes, whether it's to their business, to their school, to the park down the street, and get out of their cars. Automobiles cause far more environmental damage because of the amount of concrete, the amount of trees and excavation that has to be done. And if we drive on any of our roads, and especially in some of our periphery roads, there is certainly a horrible detriment to our wildlife. I don't think there is a day that goes by that I unfortunately do not see something lying dead on the side of our road. On any times I've ever been on the trails, I don't see dead animals from being hit by bicycles or pedestrians. And so maybe on an occasion, maybe a frog. But all kidding aside, to me, and I take property rights very seriously, and so I know staff has been excellent in working with people for years on these trail projects to have it the most least invasive to their space and what they've grown accustomed to. But we took those federal transportation dollars years ago with the idea we were going to put in infrastructure for alternative transportation, and this certainly fits the objective of what we took those funds for, and so I will support this. And over the years, we've had many of these trail projects come before us, and Greenbrier Trail, I heard a person come up to the podium and speak about the Greenbrier Trail. There was opposition to the Greenbrier Trail, and I heard a lot of the same arguments, destruction of, the habitat, paved roads where we should have, the gravel trails, lowering property values, traffic, more people coming into their neighborhood, potential for crime. After that trail was built, we had the grand opening. If I recall, I think the governor was even there at that event. And I was able to walk through that trail and see the finished product. And so many people came up to me and said, I was opposed to this, but I love it now. And so I can understand all of the concerns that have been mentioned. They're always mentioned, but again, I think history will show us, and we even had a study not too long ago that shows that this really, it doesn't impact negatively on property values, and that it increases, people's awareness in their neighborhoods of their neighbors, and there's so many more benefits. So again, the focus of this is changing transportation shift, modal shift, and because of that, I will support this because it fulfills that obligation we made when we took those federal funds.
I've had quite a few people contact me who live in the area and who don't live in the area. And the people who live close to but outside the area are generally very supportive of it in terms of using it to avoid going up and down the steep College Park hill and also being in a natural area. The people who live there are, from my reading, are also pretty supportive, with the exception of some of the properties that are most intensely affected. So what I would strongly encourage is that staff try to look at ways, as we suggested with going under Rollins and the culvert, to least affect the property owners and the property rights that are most impacted by this. The other thing is, I think when we're impacting property owners negatively, or they certainly feel negatively, and we're taking away their property, especially property in this case that is very close to their home, that we need to look at spending a little bit more money on the trail for those segments to make a better trail, not only for the general public, but for those people too. So looking again at the box culvert or a raised, straighter area, as we did with the Audubon Society. And also, I don't know how we determine the appraised value, but it seems to me the closer the property is to someone's house, that they should have a increased property value factor for their easement, because they're losing more since the property is closer to them. And in terms of the environment, as I mentioned earlier, that after Moon Valley, Getabout has more carefully done trails so that less trees are removed. So I'm hoping that although 85 trees were identified, once they get it laid out, the public will have a chance to weigh in, and it may be allowed to be more finely crafted. Also, I'm on the Collaborative Adaptive Management Stakeholder Group for the Hinkson, and have interacted with a lot of scientists, and so I've asked them about paved trails, and they have given me examples of how you can help mitigate where you do have problems with erosion or water control. So I hope that staff will look at those and bring, I won't be on council, but bring back to council some of the best practices. So each time we do a trail, we're doing it better for the property owners and better for the environment.
The danger of speaking last is all of the good ideas have already been said. There's not much that I need to add, but I do feel a need to explain my vote. It sounds like we have a council consensus to, at least at this stage, try to move forward, assuming that funds are available and that we can have a design that is acceptable. I would support the calls to try to minimize the impact on those property owners as best we can through the design of the trail. I think this route was selected because it does run through easements that the city already owns and controls, so that it already by the trail alignment is an attempt to limit that negative involvement on people who prefer not to have the trail on their property. Ms. Nauser's points were most salient, I think, to my own thoughts, is that these are funds for transportation modal shift, and so no difference through streets or sidewalks when we have to use eminent domain to be able to move forward with large infrastructure and transportation projects. Really the only time that it's really appropriate for government to use that most awesome of powers is so that we can facilitate those last pieces of the projects and that meet an overall community good. I think this project meets that standard because of the idea of modal shift, and I think that modal shift is the primary environmental impact that we're going to see. As we move people out of cars and into non-motorized transportation, we're going to have less negative environmental impacts, which is going to benefit wildlife. So for all those reasons, I'm supportive of this.
May I have a motion and a second directing staff to proceed with County House Trail Phase 2?
I'll make the motion to proceed with detailed design and to explore all possible ways to minimize the impact on private property in that final desigin.
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Please read item B.
Agenda item B, is the construction of the Shepard to Rollins East-West Connection Trail Project.
Staff, please.
This project is an extension of the Hinkson Creek Trail, providing an east-west connection from near the MU campus and downtown business district across the Hinkson Creek. Per council direction, staff contracted with a consultant to conduct a study of alternate alignments for the east side of Hinkson Creek connection. I would like to introduce John Zimmerman from our consultant Trans Systems to give a short overview of the alignment study.
Questions?
I think we're getting a presentation.
Okay.
Hi, I'm John Zimmerman. I was a study manager for this study. We had a public engagement meeting on January 26th. We had more than 185 people that attended. We received more than 200 pieces of correspondence and comments. The study itself was 4 alignments between Hinkson Creek and Old 63 to improve active transportation in that area. This map shows the 4 alignments that we looked at. The area west of the creek, connecting the Rollins Street and William Street intersection to the creek, that was studied by the city, so that was excluded from our study. But we looked at the 4 alignments east of that. Alignment 1 starts at the bridge over the Hinkson, connects into Bluffdale Drive. We did include a sidewalk for the pedestrian component to connect to Old 63. Alignment 2 went from the bridge almost due east up the hill, connected to Old 63 by Shepard Boulevard. Alignment 3 went from the bridge south through the sanitary sewer easements and the opening as best we could along Hinkson Creek. Because of the bluffs in the area, we had to cross the creek twice, so that's why there's 2 bridges before it connects into the Grindstone Creek Trail, just west of Old 63. Alignment 4 was an independent alignment, and basically was either a sidewalk or a pedway for the pedestrians that connected the pedway on Old 63 to the sidewalk on Ashland Road. We looked at 3 criteria to judge the alignments against each other. The first one was mode shift, and we looked first at walking, getting people out of cars into walking to commute or get to school. Based on the National Household Travel Survey conducted by the Department of Transportation, most people will go about a half mile to 3/4 of a mile before they would prefer to just go ahead and drive that distance. Because the 3 alignments to the north all exceeded that distance, there would be basically very little mode shift responsible from pedestrians. So on alignment 4, that one was short enough that there would be some, but because the origins and destinations in that area were so limited for that distance, we negated the walking mode shift. And we focused mainly on bicycling. According to that same survey, 3.5 miles is the magic number to get people out of their car and walking. Anything more than that is just too long. Based on the pilot program studies that were done in Columbia and in the other cities, Columbia's average trip was 7 miles. But that included recreational trips, which tend to be longer, and they don't contribute to mode shift as much as the commuting trips. So we settled on 5 miles as kind of a compromise to that distance. That fell right in line with the average commute time in Columbia, which is 16 minutes, so we felt very good about that. What we did then was we went through each alignment, branched out on existing and proposed bike facilities, and looked at the service area, who would be served by these, and developed from the city's GIS land use mapping an approximate number of dwelling units that would be served by each of these alignments, and that's what we used to look at the mode shift potential. We also looked at the environmental impacts and the considerations, especially through the Hinkson Creek corridor. This is a very sensitive area, so we looked at the creek impacts, the forest impacts, environmental regulations and permitting, as well as endangered species. And again, rated those against the other alignments. And then finally, we looked at cost. We knew the budget on the project was about $1.7 million, and we looked at each alignment, put a cost to that, and then ranked those together. A lot of this information was shared at the public meeting. This is kind of a summary of those comments, and again, you've received all of the comments that we received in your packet. One of the overriding themes of the meeting was that a large majority wanted options 1 and 3 combined. But otherwise, these are the comments that you've already seen. We then rated each of the alignments from very poor to very good. Basically, the more green dots, the better the alignment performed. So in the mode shift potential, environmental considerations, construction cost estimate, you can see that each alignment scored good in at least one of the categories, except for alignment 2, which was fair in the all 3. And alignment 1 scored well in each category. It was probably the most balanced. So based on that, our technical recommendation is alignment 1. There's that sidewalk that's involved with it that goes through the neighborhood. We do see that as an option. We do recommend to consider it further, but it is an option. Alignment 2 could be used in a future development on that private property if it wants to go forward. Alignment 3 could be a phased extension of alignment 1. And then alignment 4 could be considered to be combined either with the existing Stadium and Old 63 intersection project or a standalone project in the future. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Council questions? Carl?
Yeah, just one question. I assume that options 1, 2, and 3, not 4, but those other 3, all involve a high water bridge at one point to cross the creek. Is that right? And then there's some other bridges as well. So
that is correct.
And on option 2, that was the option that representatives from surrounding neighborhoods walked and sort of selected. And although it was more on the gas easement, so less trees would have to be removed. I remember walking it with you and asking you if it could be shifted over, and you told me that it was rerouted because of the slope, to try to get a gradual 5% slope. But you did say that it could go a little on the north part. It could have gone on the gas easements, but you didn't consider that, right?
Yes, we did look at that. We could push it a little farther to the north to go on that gas easement, but the more we did that, the steeper the grades became. So in the end, we went with the alignment that was included in the report.
And in terms of the mode shift with walking, I was surprised about that because I know the residents of Shepard Boulevard are just dying to walk down there to East Campus. So I know your national standards say a half a mile, but after the IP meeting, I talked with residents of all ages, and they were all saying, oh, sure, I would walk that in a minute. But you don't have any backup estimates for, or figures for that. It wasn't calculated in this, right?
I believe the pilot program had 3/4 of a mile as the average trip for walking.
Okay.
And 7 miles for biking.
Any other questions? Any other questions of staff?
In calculating the mode shift for option 3, did you consider the future connection of the Grindstone Trail, which is going to go east from the Hinkson Trail, just south of Stadium, and connect to a very large student housing complex at the intersection of Stadium and Highway 63?
Yes, we considered all existing and proposed alignments.
Okay, so that housing was part of the calculation of mode shift for option 3?
Yes.
Okay.
No other questions? Thank you. Any questions of Vasco? Not?
I'd like to mention, I would really like to make a motion now before the hearing for an amendment to option 1 to remove the sidewalk for a bike lane on Southwood and part of Bluffdale. Originally, a week before the IP meeting, they had the sidewalk on Woodley. There was no sidewalk before, and it was always a bike lane. This is a very quiet neighborhood. The homes on Southwood have very short yards. Some of them have very mature trees. One woman who doesn't use email because she's older, and wrote me a letter, and I just wanted to read one paragraph from it. Who's on Southwood. I will lose several things that have meaning for me and cannot be replaced. I will lose the maple tree that my late husband planted years ago, the holly bush that came from his family home, jonquils that came from my grandparents' home. The flower bed near the street is lined with bricks that my husband laid, and it's a very narrow area. The consultant has said that the option without sidewalks but a bike lane will work well, will be safe. Shepard Boulevard, which has much more heavy traffic, has a bike lane on it. So I'd like to make that amendment to option 1 to be considered.
I'll be happy to second that. Bluffdale, Southwood, and Woodley are all contained streets. There's no through traffic. The only automobile traffic is going to the homes there. I don't think that a sidewalk is necessary on those streets. It causes excessive additional disruption to those homeowners. And by not building the sidewalk, I understand we'll save about $140,000 on option 1, so I'll be happy to second.
We have a motion second to delete the sidewalks from option 1. Any more discussion on that motion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion passes 6-0. We'll open the public hearing.
My name is Darwin Heinman.
Did you go 3 minutes and 15 seconds so I could say I buzzed you
3
once?
minutes. Oh, you want to cut me off? Yeah. And my address is 1223 Francis Drive before you cut me off for forgetting that.
Just lost some time, Darwin.
And I know something about listening to one more speaker who has nothing new to say. And so I thought I'd just give you a little bit of your own medicine here. But in any case, I picked up a few things that I thought were kind of interesting. Somebody said that this is a shining star, that can't pass it up. This is where the kids will get out into nature. Another said you need to put the trails where they will be useful. Another said it's a place where you hook all the trails together. And another one added that it is value added to our trail system. I think those are great quotes, and I think it kind of sums up the situation. I know that there are others who would probably be willing to speak up, but I'm going to see if we can just get them to stand. All those favor options 1 and 3, please stand. Thank you very much. How much more time do I have before you're going to cut me off?
You just went past 3 minutes.
I
apologize for the clock being
all
wrong.
you do, really.
Anyone else? I'll close the public hearing. I'll go first. I'm a big fan of 1 and 3. I want to thank staff for a very detailed analysis, all 287 pages. I want to thank Annette Triplett for an excellent presentation. There's really nothing to add to the presentation she made. And I want to thank Darwin Hyman for the gift of the legacy he's given to Columbia, Missouri.
As the 6th Ward representative, and this trail is in the 6th Ward, I would like to go next and sort of give a a bigger picture and a little bit of history of the area and try to address all of the concerns and the main points. This trail option, really 1 and 3, the basic option came up many years ago, and it was rejected in part. They were considering low-water bridges, concerned about trails by the Hinkson, concerns about, from the Shepard neighborhood and East Campus, about a better connection. They were interested in the east-west connection. So we're looking at people who want to go from the east to the west, as well as the people who want to go from the north to the south, and how this connects with the overall trail system. So one of the things that happened after that trail was not passed was that representatives from East Campus and Shepard and Hinkson and the immediate the closest areas walked about 9 different options to see if we could come up with a connection that served people better, was cheaper, didn't have the concerns with flooding and the interference with the low water bridges with the kayakers, as well as there were concerns from East Campus with a paved trail going through a natural area, Clyde Wilson Park, and their trails. So I think the time has been well spent. What I've heard from people in the Shepard area, they would like a more direct east-west route. We've heard tonight that no matter where you go, if you go option 2, we were hoping that it would be less incline than it was and less expense than it is. I've heard from people in the Shepard area and East Campus who would be very happy with option 2, but they would be satisfied with option 1, which also, it's not a flat area. It does not eliminate the old 63 hill. You would still have to go up some of Old 63 to get to Southwood or even to Bluffdale. The Shepard neighborhood will have to go down Old 63 and up Old 63. So there's a bit of a hill even in option 1 for east-west people and north-south people going north and south. When I worked in Buttonwood and Providence and then Nifong and Forum, I would bike to work at least once a week when there was casual day. And it is tough going up Old 63. That was when I was younger. And it's tougher as you get older, and I hope to be around for my 90s or 100. And I do think over time that that hill becomes more difficult. My husband and I do, and as many people do, enjoy using the trails, and there is advantage of having the flat trail on Old 63. I've heard from not only people in the immediate area, but the larger community and people in Shepard who, most of them do not like option 4 at all. They don't want to walk or bike close to stadium that is busy with traffic and hot. And they don't want to send their kids there. And the people that live in Shepard will still have to go up and down Old 63, and the people who are traveling through or going from Broadway Village who want to go to Grindstone will still have to go up and down Old 63. So there's a lot of pros and cons about the options. I want to address the natural area and the concerns about nature and the concerns about Hinkson and the concerns about flooding, there's a couple important points that really haven't been made. This is a beautiful area, but it is privately owned. It's not an Audubon Society-owned area. It's zoned R1. Right now, it has the right, the property owner has the right to develop that property, which means putting in roads. It means putting in driveways. It means putting in homes. That's what they have a right to do. So the paved area is a very minor, the trail area is a very minor thing compared to what can be done right now with the property. What I've been working on and advocating for, because this area is really valuable to the Hinkson Creek, it's valuable as a stormwater natural area, it's valuable to nature, that it would be a good piece of property for many, many reasons for the city to acquire through its parks program for a natural area, which we have funds to, we have allocated funds not only for active parks but natural area parks. So in my mind, from listening to all the different interests, I think it's the best thing we can do to help preserve that area and meet the travel needs is to have a trail. I know, but acquire it as a park. And what I'd like to see, I was a little disappointed that option 2 came out different than we had anticipated it and more expensive than we had anticipated. And I would love to see, and I think it would be very valuable to have a walking trail, non-paved, from Old 63, option 2, to the bridge. If the city could acquire the property, that would be very useful to the Shepard neighborhood, and it would be similar to some of the great walking, non-paved trails that are in Clyde Wilson Park. So I think we can work with people who want to enhance this area, to remove the invasives, to make more natural plantings, to get people out there to enjoy the area if we can acquire it. It definitely, it's already R1. It should definitely not be rezoned anything higher, and I think the community would really be well served to acquire it. So that's sort of my hope and vision. Just looking at the 6th Ward, I probably would make a motion for option 2 because that, I think, serves the 6th Ward most beneficially. But given the cost and that, I talked to a lot of people in the Shepard area who are okay, some very supportive option 1 and many okay with option 1, that I would be fine with voting for option 1 and hope that that bigger picture carries through. And option 3, I can definitely see how the connection there goes really to Grindstone. So people from Stevens Lake and Hominy Trail don't have to go up Old 63, but can go through Bluff. And, you know, the fact of the matter is people coming from the north are going to go down Bluff. You know, they have a right to go down Bluffdale. But people from Shepard, it's closer and better to go down Southwood. So I think people will take various routes. But we just need to work to really, as one speaker said, look at the big picture, and you know, you can't get everything you want, but how can you really maximize this to the community. And I guess I want to say, as a side note, I have, walked this area I've lived there for 26 years and walked it with my kids, but I can only walk it in the winter because I get covered with ticks and chiggers, and my dog gets covered with them just walking in that grass. So it's inaccessible to me, and it's inaccessible to many other people. The paved trail will allow people to get into that area, but there's the whole rest of it that, if we can acquire it, is beautiful and very valuable for the community.
I want to jump.
Let me propose that we get a motion on the floor and then continue the discussion. And because we don't have a motion yet, and this is an item. So may I have a motion to proceed with 1 and 3?
I'll be happy to make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Now we'll continue with the discussion.
If I could jump in, I had to go
Go ahead.
last time, after all the good points were taken.
You want to go early?
I don't have a lot to say on this, so I will be brief. There was no mode shift that came with option 4, so even though it's lower cost, it doesn't achieve what we're trying to do with the Get About funds, which is really mode shift and getting people walking and riding bikes. The options 1 and 3 does increase connectivity, that final piece, and looking forward to seeing what we can do with the available funds.
Earl?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few things. I think I'll take a little different tack here, and that is, I mean, I mentioned with regard to the other trails, or the other trail that we voted on, there was a bit of a history to this. It went all the way back to 2007. Darwin remembers our discussions, and there was $13 million left over in the Get About funds to try and figure out how we would fill in the spokes of this trail wheel. And we avoided, so we did. We allotted monies to various projects. Eventually, those projects resulted in the Hominy Branch and lots of other trail projects that were somewhat less controversial. And it strikes me that there's still a bit of controversy with regard to this issue, given that it seems to be a facing off between the folks in this room between options 1 or 1 and 3 and maybe 4. And I also told you that my ideas have kind of evolved. So I have become accustomed to the idea that we lost a lot of the battles about various pervious pavement surfaces and other kinds of surfaces that had other issues that the staff was involved in. And I have become a fan of putting these trails in places that increase connectivity and to some degree increase our capacity for aesthetics and if you will, the other part of this, which is the quality of life or the recreational aspects of this. However, I'm not entirely sold, and I also still believe that there's a great deal of controversy here. This was all discussed within the context of options that did not include option 4. I will tell you outright that I'm inclined to support 4, not that I don't think that we should not have something happen in this area. Perhaps there will be some development later on. But the reason I say this is we recently went through a 2-day retreat, and we were presented with some data that suggested that we ought to maximize the bang for our buck. There were certain areas in the city, when you saw the map, the entire map of the city, that there seemed to be some areas were neglected, particularly when it came in areas, the mayor will appreciate this, public safety was on top of the list. So were roads. And it seemed to me that dividing line was I-70, and the north and the northeast, particularly Mr. Trapp's ward and my ward, tended to be left out of this thing. And when we start talking about holes and gaps here, and frankly I think that option 4 may plug one of these gaps, at least to some degree, at least a placeholder. The biggest hole and gap, frankly, is in the north and the northeast. The only trail up there is Bear Creek. and nothing connects to it. And I can remember when we had this discussion in 2007, and there was $13 million left, and we were arguing over whether or not this trail that we are speaking to right now was viable, and we decided not to do it at that time because it was too controversial. One of the ones that came to the top was a trail along the railroad right-of-way, which would require no trees to cut down, which would connect Paris Road from the center of the city probably all the way up to the Bear Creek Trail. That is still a big hole. That's still a big gap. So I guess not only are we not going to lose anything, should we proceed with option 4? And I must admit, I'm not the expert, and I saw what the numbers were. I'm a bit skeptical of that mode shift given what's happening on the end of Stadium. But nonetheless, I think that is a route that is a viable route, and it doesn't preclude doing anything else here should that become an option. What I'm wondering is, when we prioritize these things, and the mayor asked this question about how much money was left or whether these projects would actually get built if there was enough money left in Get-About, somebody even asked the question, and maybe the staff could answer this question. I know these options were rated at about $1.7 million, the ones next to the creek. Does that include is that is just $1.7 million from Get-About funds, or is there any extra public funds in terms of easements and other maintenance? Certainly will eventually be.
That's the budget that we had, yes. That's what is in the budget, is $1.7 million.
And where does it come from?
Get-About.
So all of that $1.7 million, and this will not cost any more. That's your best estimate of what this would cost, and it's all from Get-About.
For option 1.
For option 1.
Yeah.
And what about for option 3?
Well, we got different estimates. The total between the two is about 2.5, 2.6. For 1 and 3, it's about 2.5, 2.6.
So 1.7 was allocated in the budget. The estimated costs of the estimates are about $700,000 for option 1 and about $2.2 million for option 3.
I was just trying to sort out whether or not this was entirely from Get-About or there was other additional monies that were involved in this.
Currently it is, but we're still talking to Parks and Rec to see if they have any money that's left from old projects or anything that they could possibly put toward the project as well. We haven't had that discussion yet, but we're in the process.
Well, and just one other issue, and that issue is this, that all options 1, 2, and 3 all require a high water bridge. And I know that when I walked this property, I've walked it now 4 or 5 times, first time in 2007 and since then several times, and we crossed the creek at a low water point, and we were talking about the potential for low water bridges. Now, I understand that gets DNR involved, lots of other folks if you touch the creek, which is the whole point of putting a high water span in. But we had this experience with the Moon Valley project where there was a good deal of habitat. We learned a lot from that because I think there was improvements that I alluded to before of improvements for bat habitat and so on and so forth when they put that high span bridge in there. But subsequent to that, we had another hearing and some legislation for the Grindstone Creek Trail. And Mayor Heineman and a bunch of the rest of us went out on that trail and talked to the staff with regard to putting in low water bridges rather than high water bridges at that time. And I thought that was the direction that we were going in. I guess this is the exception. But for me, that's an issue, this business about the high water bridge across Hinkson Creek. And if we develop this further, I may not prevail with this vote. I mean, it may not make any difference. But if we prevailed with another option, that would be something to consider in addition to what I'm offering you now. But the way things stand, I guess I'm going to have to take a bit of a selfish position here and try and stand up for that big gap that represents the north and the northeast in terms of this Get-About plan and filling in these spokes and wheel and suggesting that may be part of the priority that we could use if we decide not to go ahead with these very expensive options. If we decide instead to go with option 4, then that may leave more money in that pot to develop some of those other spokes. But my support is going to be toward option 4.
I'm going to make just one real quick comment. I don't think I really need to add anything new to my comments on the prior trail project we just discussed, and for that reason I will support this project as well. But I would also like to say I was very impressed by the number of young people who came to the city council meeting this evening to exercise their rights as a citizen to speak what's on their mind. So I see most of them have left because they have school tomorrow. Unfortunately, I have work, and we have a lot of work yet to do this evening, but I think that's great, and I hope to see more of that in the future. So.
Well, I'd like to start again by acknowledging the concerns of residents of a particular area who, where a public project may happen and impact them. And it's really important for our elected officials to weigh those concerns, which are very impactful on those people living right there, versus the concerns and the benefits for the whole city. And I do think that the city has done that over many years of looking at this project. Originally, this trail was designed to go right along the Hinkson Creek, through the backyards of the houses on Bluffdale. Those are very short backyards, and in response to the concerns of those residents, the plan was changed to put it on the public street. And there's no eminent domain involved in this part of the trail. So I do feel that there has been some good balance. I think option 4 is an important project to do sometime. It's miserable walking or riding a bike over that bridge over the Hinkson Creek on Stadium. And I've done it many times, and it's unsafe. But I think that it's a lower priority than some of the other options that we've got here. And we have to look at the whole system. We have to take the big picture and the long-term view. And I think the best bit of terminology I heard was the word linchpin. And if you look at where all of our trails are and how they connect, this is a missing piece. And putting the trail in between Grindstone Nature Area and Stevens Lake Park along that low-lying valley will be inserting the linchpin that connects the whole system. It will connect to the north the extension of the Hinkson Creek Trail through Stevens Lake Park and on and on. And that trail will be going up into the 3rd Ward, Carl. And the Harmony Branch Trail, which branches off to the east and I think also goes into the 3rd Ward up to Keene Street and the interstate up there. It connects those parts with all of the trails to the south, the rest of the Hinkson Creek that passes to the south of the city, the Grindstone Trail that comes in from the southeast, and the trails to the west side. With the hill there, that is a barrier. The purpose of the Get About Columbia project is to effect a mode shift. We have seen a creditable mode shift so far, but this is a barrier. It's a real barrier. There are a lot of student housing units and destinations, shopping to the northeast and to the southeast of this area. And then there's the whole campus and downtown Columbia area to the west. And the options 1 and 3 will create a Y, a sideways Y, that will connect all of that together. And I think that the mode shift will be very substantial. I think we should be very thoughtful about the flooding issue and do appropriate studies. And I'd love to talk with experts more about this, but I still don't really understand how a 10-foot wide strip of impervious surface is going to have a significant impact on a whole area. Parking lot, absolutely. Large, flat-roofed building, absolutely. Driveways and roads that are 30, 40, 50 feet wide sometimes, sure, they catch an enormous amount of water, they pick up all kinds of pollutants, the water runs off in a great big deluge and hits the softer earth and carves, erodes the earth. But I don't think that a 10-foot wide cycle path with no appreciable pollutants on it is going to be substantially damaging to the area. So I will be supporting options 1 and 3, but I'll also be supporting a lot of It's Our Wild Nature's vision. that is a tremendous opportunity there to preserve that piece of land, to restore it to its natural state with more natural plantings, to create an educational exhibit there for children and students at the university and community members to learn about the natural ecology of the area, and having access with the bike path and walking path that will go along the very edge of that area closer to the creek will actually open it up to more people, and more people will gain an understanding of these environments and support for protecting more environments in the future. So I support 1 and 3. I'd like to add to the motion the request that staff give us some options for finding the funds. The $1.74 million is insufficient to build both.
Well, I think that goes with that's understood. I mean, we're asking staff to come back with, if the money is not there, they will come back with us with a list of possibilities, which may involve priorities.
And then the other option
follows.
The other option I'd like you to look at, and there have been some discussions about that, is whether there's a possibility to have the section from Rollins down to the creek on the west side of the creek go a little further south and possibly eliminate one of the high water bridges by connecting and having that bridge further south, or really in between the two southerly bridges as currently drawn.
Right. We'll have to look at the west side. We haven't even looked at the west side of the creek yet and how that's going to.
And that'll depend on university desires, because it's on their property. But I understand they may have changed their position from a few years ago.
It's just, if you get farther south, it gets to be a really steep bluff on that one side.
Realize we can't go that far south. All right.
All right. We have a motion second to approve 1 and 3. Had discussion. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
The motion passes 5-1. Let's have a 5-minute break.